We're live.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. You're tuned into match three of round two of the International Reparations Debate Competition for 2026. And earlier, like literally just now, we would have witnessed two formidable teams contend with moral, historical, and political weight emotions on reparatory justice. One such team would have secured their place in the next round. That's Queen's College, who went up against St. Joseph Convent, Port of Spain. And from that match, Queen's College would have emerged victorious, thus advancing to round three. Now, the simple question then is who in this match will join them? So in this match, we have Herbert Morrison Technical High School in Jamaica debating in proposition, and Merl Grove High School, also from Jamaica, debating in opposition. Two institutions, one shared national history, and a motion that we think strikes the heart of modern activism. My name is Cardiga Nelson, and for the purposes of this match, I'm honored to serve as your moderator and chair adjudicator. Before we proceed, however, it is important that we recognize that this competition stands on the shoulders of institutions and partners deeply committed to serious scholarship and principled dialogue on reparations. So we extend hearty and sincere thanks really to the University of West Indies, the Center of Reparations Research, UE Press, GID Limited, the University of Hull, and our principal partners, the Repair Campaign. Your continued investment ensures that these conversations not only are had, but are well had. And so joining me on the panel this afternoon, I am pleased to welcome two esteemed panelists. We'll invite briefly to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Javon Downey.
Hello, a pleasant afternoon, everyone. The name is Javon Downey, like you just heard, and I take it an esteemed pleasure to be serving as one of your wing adjudicators in this match. I do look forward to an interesting matchup of ideas. Thank you. All the best to every team, by the way.
Thank you very much, Javon. And secondly, joining me on my panel, on this panel really, is Mr. Shabar.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shavar Kiandu. I'm also the adjudicator for this match, and I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. Best of wishes to all it.
Thank you very much, Shafar. Now, my panel this afternoon is especially privileged to be joined by a guest judge from one of our partnering institutions. And so representing the University of Hull, we're indeed honored to welcome Dr. Cassandra Guptar, who will introduce herself momentarily. And to Dr. Guptar, the floor is now yours.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a lecturer in history and legacies of slavery at the University of Hull. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate. And good luck to both teams.
Thank you so very much indeed, Dr. Guptar. We are indeed privileged and honored to have you. Now, to the teams who will carry this discussion forward, in proposition, Herbert Morrison Technical High School, in opposition, Merl Grove High School. I'll now invite the speakers from both teams to introduce themselves, starting with Herbert Morrison Technical High School in proposition, who I'll invite to introduce themselves in the order in which they'll speak.
Hi everyone, I'm Asher Mundal and I'm the first speaker for proposition. Hello everyone, I'm Simar Davis, second speaker.
I am the biggest speaker for proposition.
Thank you so very much, Herbert Morrison Technical High School. And now we turn the floor over to our opposition team, Merl Grove, who I'll invite also to introduce themselves, similarly in the order in which they'll speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Haley Marshall, and I am the first speaker of today's match in terms of opposition.
Good afternoon. My name is Joshanti Rade, and I'm the third speaker for the match.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanji Dawson, and I will be the second speaker of this match, and we are the Merl Grove.
Thank you so very much, Merl Grove High School, for your introductions. Now, With any match, there is a motion, and so the motion governing this match reads, this House believes that social media activism does more harm than good for reparations movement. Once more, this House believes that social media activism does more harm than good for the reparations movement. So this motion is about strategy, legitimacy, visibility, and consequences. And so in an era in which we live where movements are built, challenged, and sometimes distorted online, the question before these teams is whether digital advocacy advances reparatory justice or does it undermine it. So the teams have already been briefed on the rules governing this debate. However, for the interest of you, or viewing and listening audience, I will repeat them for your sake. So the rules are as follows. The first speakers of the debate have 7 minutes to deliver their substantive speeches. The second speakers, 6 minutes, and the third speakers have 5 minutes. Now, both the first and last minute of the first and second speakers' speeches are protected time. So the first minute protected, the last minute also protected time. Outside of these protected time periods, points of information are allowed and are very much encouraged between the teams. After the first speaker's delivery and the second speaker's delivery, we'll have two very interesting periods of cross-examinations where both teams will have the opportunity to field questions across to each other. But the rules pertaining to those will be covered when we get to that period in the debate. That being said, now I think I've spoken well enough. I now call this match to order, and I invite the first speaker from Herbert Morrison Technical High School, speaking in proposition, to begin this debate. Hear, hear.
Here, okay, thank you, Diego. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, in 2013, 15 Caribbean nations did something historic. The United to form the Caribbean Reparations Commission, led by the distinguished historian Sir Hilary Best. They dropped a 10-point plan, which is a sophisticated legal and economic framework demanding debt cancellation, public health investments, and technology transfer from forward looking. This is a serious diplomatic strategy designed to win. Today, that strategy is failing. Just 2 years ago, the Commonwealth federal government meeting in Samoa, the UK Prime Minister refused to even place reparations on the agenda. Why? We tell you it is because social media has taken a sophisticated diplomatic demand and planted it into a cultural war agreement. It has traded political viability for viral visibility. We are emphatically pro-reparations, and we believe that that is it is because we want Caribbean to win that we must reject a method of advocacy that is structurally incapable of delivering victory. Let us be precise about this debate. We're strictly defining the reparations movement as the Caribbean Liberation. This is a state-led diplomatic initiative. The actors are sovereign governments like Barbados, Jamaica, and Guyana. The targets are forward-looking Polish like the UK, France, and the Netherlands. The mechanism of victory is international law, Commonwealth negotiation, and bilateral treaties. Context is crucial. Caribbean citizens do not vote to UK elections. Therefore, the movement relies entirely on diplomatic leverage and moral authority to persuade European leaders. We define social media activism as advocates on platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. These platforms are architecturally
Points of
designed for
information.
negativity, emotional outrage, I'll take a vision second, and algorithmic polarization. This debate must be judged on legislative and diplomatic success, raising awareness is a false metric if that awareness hardens opposition. If the movement is more famous but less likely to get paid, we win. I'll get into my first method of argumentation, which is when we're going to be talking about neutralization. Because the social media systematically strips the reparations demand of necessary complexity. It converts by the diplomatic proposal into a dismissible character. The mechanism here is structural. The Caribbean 10-point plan is dense. It argues that hypertension, diabetes in the Caribbean and threats legacies of implementation malnutrition, and this requires billions in public health investment. It argues
Points
for
of
that
information.
based on the history of colonial extraction not accepted, social media and punish this sort of complexity. You cannot explain the etymological legacy of slavery in a 15-second reel. Therefore, the algorithm selects for the simplest, most inflammatory version of the demand, which is Britain owes me a check. This creates a specific harm that we call the straw man effect. When the demand becomes cash for individuals, rather than investment for development, it also allows European leaders to dismiss it entirely as unrealistic. And I'll show you. The cash demand generates clicks. And the development demand generates policy. We see this as the individual payment narrative. If you put TikTok right now, the dominant narrative is individual cash pays. The CMC has never asked for this. They asked infrastructure investment. Yet, because the false narrative is viral, MPs from going to and claim it is actually perfectly possible to mail a check to every Caribbean citizen. Therefore, they earn the corporations are on people. So it has allowed them to debate this slide rather than the structural truth that we are processing. This is during the 2022 Royal Tour, when Prince William visited Jamaica. The excluded focus of him shaking hands through a wire fence. It was a viral sensation of all trades. But what was the result? Did we get a treaty? No. We got a crimes for the royals, followed by SARS. The UK government realized that they could wear whether a 48
Points of information.
policy. The movement got usually needed money. Diplomacy required precision. But social media creates noise. When it's a question of reparation immediately, then the real version, the movement loses its leverage. I'll take your paper information on that.
What measurable evidence shows that the harm outweighs the good?
With respect to harm in one sense, are you talking about harm in reference to the sort of position that this is publicity is that's the only harm that we can try to think of, and basically demonstrating actually I've just shown you, I'm just showing you Prince William's run how that is uniquely harmful and how basically that has been had no effect on climate change. That so in the Caribbean Reparation Commission's actual notion in of itself. So I'm not sure what's harm you're talking about the purpose of the so we're going to get into my second argument. We'll start into the backlash. We use social media movements certainly faster and more effectively than it gives support. This is for the domestic political capital needed for our win. The Caribbean needs to be Dutch prime minister to say yes. These leaders are democratically elected. They cannot stand on questions checking the domestic population needs the idea. Social media acts as an asymmetric polarization machine. And I'll show you. So firstly, it creates the identity threat. When a reparation post goes viral, it
Point of information.
short Dutch posts, not right. Algorithms push this content to people likely outraged to maximize engagement. On elites, not prioritization of funds. Before super anti-corporation sentiment was passing, the opposition is organized. Influencers in the UK harvest on Caribbean context and use to radicalize movements against what they call woke demand. We see this playing in the car song people. Look at 2024 the most meeting Samoa just years ago. Chris was the Labour Prime Minister, and his party is the most sympathetic to the cause. Yet he hard line against reparations. Why? Because he has seen the polling. Despite 10 years of raising awareness in social media, support for reparations in the UK remains still below 25%. Yes, not the needle. It is hard to sense of noble engaged in reparations. Social media has strong reputation line with sleep and severe. You saw this with the Dutch apology in 2022. Prime Minister Mark apologized for slavery. One something? No, I'm going to tell you right now. It's index on reparation payments. He gave social media yes pictures to share on Instagram, while denying the material return of the money. Allowing for progressiveness will already pay this route again. Social media has turned reparations into a culture war. Culture wars are great for engagement, but terrible for the cause. The current negotiation with the other side's electorate has been algorithmically equipped into a frenzy against you. Panel, the opposition telling that visibility is power. We disagree. Visibility problem, which is just a spectacle. Visibility that our engineering is a liability. The current reparations movement is fighting for the redistribution of wealth on a global scale. It is the heart task of the 21st century, and it requires very much inherent precision that social media cannot possess. We are basically like, for the sake of the movement, we are on proposition that we are proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, we thank the first speaker on proposition, Mr. Ashamantle, for the very substantive speech in opening this debate. And now we welcome the first leader, or the first speaker on side opposition, Merl, to open this debate on side opposition and tell us why they oppose this motion. Here.
Good afternoon, everyone. All protocols observed. Before we begin our speech, the proposition claimed that social media promotes polarization. However, it is crucial to understand that polarization happens when an issue challenges power. Esteemed adjudicators, teammates, opponents, and members of the audience, My name is Haley Marshall, the leader of opposition for today's match, and I strongly reject the claim that social media activism does more harm than good for the reparations movement. As first speaker, I will demonstrate how social media acts as the catalyst for shifting the narrative from colonial powers into the hands of the masses, proving that reparations depend on reclaiming historical memory and moral legitimacy. My second speaker will then expand on the failure of traditional media gatekeepers and explain how social media provides the essential visibility required for modern education and mobilization. Lastly, our speaker will ultimately seal the deal. Contrary to what my opposition falsifies as social media activism, according to the Journal of International and Social Research, social media activism is defined as the use of social media platforms as tools to promote political causes, organize protests, and mobilize people towards collective action. From the period of slavery, the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the Civil Rights Movement, times where there was no social media to disseminate the school of thought of the unheard masses, we see one constant: ideas. Our psychologist Carl Jung reminds us man does not make his ideas. We could say that man's ideas make him. Ideas are the seeds of our greatest creations. They shape movements, identities, and ultimately history itself. If ideas are the seeds of our greatest creation, then social media is the soil in which those seeds are planted, spread, and mobilized on a global scale. With the help of social media, modern ideas are delivered by the masses, transforming the unheard into the seen. We see this phenomenon with the Free Palestine hashtag, which has generated over 35 million TikTok videos and 11.1 Instagram posts, nearly 28 more times than hashtag Stand with Israel, allowing the citizens of Gaza to document their suffering in real time. Platforms such as Eyes on Palestine have humanized the conflict through raw, unfiltered footage, bypassing censorship systems. As a result, worldwide university encampments, revived boycott campaigns impacting corporations like Starbucks and McDonald's, and mass protests demanding international intervention have increased significantly. Executives in the affected corporation face groundbreaking stock drops following online controversy, demonstrating that digital mobilization can translate into the measurable economic pressure. Even the global Samud flotilla, though unsuccessful in delivering humanitarian aid, intensified diplomatic pressure and pushed more governments to recognize Palestine as a crucial stepping stone towards liberation formally. These mobilizations did not emerge in isolation. They were coordinated, amplified, and internationalized through digital platforms that collapsed geographical boundaries and accelerated collective action. We can apply the same principle to the Caribbean reparation movement. Organizations such as the CARICOM, Reparation Commission, and the Repair Campaign have used digital platforms since 2020 to train hashtag Caribbean reparations. During UN assemblies, cataloging colonial denialism and mobilizing diaspora communities. What once failed under elite control narratives is now amplified through mass digital participation, generating global public support in Britain and increasing pressure on former colonial powers to confront the economic and psychological deprivation imposed upon Caribbean societies. As George Orwell described in his novel 1984, quote, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. For the longest time, colonial authorities have authorized or controlled the social institutions and traditional media outlets, such as the BBCs and the Reuters of the world, which are the key components for formulating ideologies. During the imperial heights of the 1930s, the BBC World Service, funded by the very government that profited from slavery, portrayed abolition as Britain's moral pinnacle, intentionally omitting the resistance of enslaved Africans to justify a civilizing mission. These are ideologies that have altered historical perception by framing reparations not as a legal debt, but a demand for handouts or a punishment of descendants. Reparations are fundamentally about who controls historical memory. In the past, without social media, reparations have failed to gain traction because former colonial statutes or states held a narrative monopoly in the present, allowing them to sanitize the past. Social media activism disrupts this power structure. It allows Caribbean advocacy groups, such as the Repair Campaign, to counter the ideology by debunking the ideological weapons of colonial powers in real time. Here it is crucial to preempt the idea that social media promotes slacktivism, the idea that clicking a like button or sharing a post makes raw change. They may argue that engagement is an illusion of our oppressive experiential world. However, we are here to counter the claim, as according to the Pew Research Center, 40% of users have used social media to find rallies, leading to real actions like one organizer recording 30 attendees via online sharing. Even if only a minority translates digital engagement into physical action in an ecosystem of millions, that minority becomes a mass movement. Members of the proposition, I leave you with this. If the power once depended on controlling history, why would decentralizing that control be considered damage rather than justice? The colonial monopoly in history has been broken. Ledger is open. The evidence is viral. The world is watching, and the time for repair is now, with the help of social media activism. Henceforth, I reject.
With that being said, we thank the first speaker on side opposition in Merl High to have started this debate and offered her substantive as to why they oppose this motion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to enter our first exciting period of cross-examinations, where we'll see teams fielding 3 questions to each other and then responding likewise. So how this works is we'll first start with our proposition team fielding 3 questions to our opposition. The questions ought not to be any longer than 10 seconds, and the response is 45 seconds. The team in is answering the question can join together to offer a response to the question, or if one person chooses, they can also just respond by themselves. That being said, we welcome Herbert Morrison to start this segment by fielding your first question to the opposition in Merl.
Thank you. When a 400-year history of systemic oppression introduced a 60-second covenant in itself, aren't we just turning a sacred demand for justice into disposable entertainment?
Social media activism is not a form of disposable entertainment. It's a form of expressing historical accounts and ultimately reclaiming history for what is truly what it is.
How do we know social media is actually building a movement rather than just giving people a way to feel like they've helped without ever having to open their wallet or go differently?
Could you repeat the question?
How do we know social media is actually building a movement rather than just giving people a way to feel like they've helped without ever having to open their wallet or go differently?
Well, as I would have stated in my speech regarding the whole Palestine conflict, social media, it didn't evolve. It didn't necessarily, especially before the conflict, there was no form of social media for us to truly realize the gravity of what has happened within the conflict. And due to this form of mobilization with the help of social media, people have organized protests, and these protests have gravitated governmental pressure. And the result of that was the United Nations finally recognizing the Palestinian conflict as a genocide.
Since algorithm prioritize outrage to keep people scrolling, isn't social media actually making it harder to have calm, persuasive conversations needed to win over the undecided voters we need?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
We're not able to hear you clearly.
Since algorithms prioritize outrage to keep people scrolling, isn't social media actually making it harder to have the calm, persuasive conversations needed to win over the undecided voters we need?
To answer that, which is why we should continuously promote reparations. This debate that we're talking about right now, we're pushing out to the public that we should take this situation serious and we should continuously promote this.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, no, unfortunately, I can't respond to that. But ladies and gentlemen, Herbert Morrison, Technical Merl, thank you so much for this very spirited questions, Herbert Morrison, and to Merl for responding so adeptly. We now turn the floor over to Merl, who will field 3 questions to Herbert Morrison Technical High School, and for Herbert Morrison to respond to these questions. Just a reminder, questions are 10 seconds and the response 45 seconds.
Okay. First question, without social media, how would marginalized voices gain visibility in mainstream discourse about reparations?
Could you repeat that once more?
Okay, without social media, how would marginalized voices gain visibility in mainstream discourse about reparations?
So one more time. Ask it repeat once more. Yeah, we're so sorry. Just once more.
Okay. Without social media, how would marginalized voices gain visibility in mainstream discourse about reparations?
Um, well, I guess we want marginalized voices to be able to give their opinions on the matter. We need to control what exactly is pushed out, because if you send out a negative image, it's going to deteriorate our own campaign when we go to present arguments to the UK government. And whilst visibility is good, we understand that visibility is good, that doesn't necessarily contribute to understanding even empathy towards or what we want to achieve for reparations. So whilst we understand the marginalization thing and we do fancy to say that hey, that's something that will be as a result of it. If it doesn't further our goal of getting actual reparations, then it really is no victory. One.
Okay. Another question?
In light of what you said about the form of negativity in terms of social media, how would you account for certain things in the world, such as internet censorship from governments, given that social media does create a form of increase or pressure for mobilization of movements?
All right, just repeat that question once more. I think I don't want to misunderstand.
In terms of what you mentioned about negativity, in terms of marginalized voices, how would you account for certain things such as government censorship of social media, such as what happenings in Brazil or Bangladesh? How would you account for that, given that social media does promote a positive pressure in a way
On government.
on governments?
All right. So first of all, we have to understand two things. First of all, the countries, all the actors in this debate are all democratic states. There is no incentive for them to censor anything that is regarding reparations. Secondly, as it comes to what is it? What are we talking about? Pressure. Okay. So you were talking about pressure. Okay, so there's the democratic states and also, oh yes, social media is a neutral actor, right? So there's nothing inherently good or inherently bad. It's structurally designed to maximize engagement. So to make the notion that the internet is inherently good or inherently bad is inherently wrong because it's inherently a neutral actor. So that's what we got with this. Yeah.
Okay. Is the problem truly social media itself or the misuse of it by individuals?
Well, then, really and truly, if that was the case, then we wouldn't be having a debate because in answering that, then we can see that social media itself is not effective, whether or not it's the misuse or not. Once again, I reiterate, it is a neutral act, and the way that it operates is a system of engagement. But both the people who support and are against the movement. So basically, if you show even one single notion that you're against the matter, social media is going to begin to push you towards the notion of being against it altogether. There is no point at which you're going to say, in order for you to return to the positive section of it, you must force yourself to return. And otherwise, you'll be going towards the negative and pushing social media to push it to other persons using the algorithm.
Should I now ask another question, Judge?
No. You had few questions to them. So remember, just 3 questions per
Okay.
cross. And so we thank you very much, Merl, for those 3 very spirited questions, and to Herbert Morrison for replying in a similar fashion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we would have heard the first speakers, we would have heard the first period of cross-examination, and now we welcome the second speakers in this debate, starting with the second proposition speaker from Herbert Morrison Technical High, who will deliver his substantive, continuing the arguments and stance by Herbert Morrison.
Okay, thank you. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the opposition has told us that visibility is the precursor to victory. They have argued that before you can fix a problem, the world must know about it. In a vacuum, that might be true, but we are not debating in a vacuum. We are debating a specific diplomatic conflict between Caribbean states and European powers. In this context, visibility is not a neutral good. If the world sees a distorted, cartoonish version of your demand, that visibility will hurt you. If the visibility triggers a massive backlash that harms your own resolve, that visibility hurts you. And the visibility tricks your own supporters into thinking they have achieved something when they have actually done nothing, that visibility disturbs. My first speaker has already demonstrated how social media trivializes the 10-point plan into a demand for individual cash, allowing leaders like Carl Starmer to dismiss it as unworkable. They have told with organized opposition in the UK faster than it will support. I will not extend our case by proving that social media actively cannibalizes the movement's resources. I will show you how it creates a phenomenon called slacktivism, which displaces the real unglamorous institutional work required to win diplomatic negotiations. But first, let us address the defense from opposition regarding awareness. They claim that millions of young people now know the word reparation because of TikTok. We argue that this is negative knowledge. It is harder to teach someone the truth, but they've already learned the line. When a young activist learns on Twitter that reparations will be ceasing British assets tomorrow, and then they encounter the CRC's actual plan for long-term restructuring, they often feel disappointed or betrayed. They attack their own leaders for being too moderate. This is not building an army. It is building an ungovernable mob that attacks the movement's own generals. Opposition trades the CRC's credibility a shallow form of popularity that vanishes the moment the algorithm changes. The opposition may claim that social media democratizes the movement by giving everyone a voice, but in diplomacy, you do not want 1,000 voices. You only want one. You
Point of
want unified
information.
majority of curriculum decline, not the chaos of a valid influencer shouting death to the colonizers and handing the British press an excuse to brand the entire reparations effort as extremists. Democratization here means fragmentation, and fragmentation means the cut. This is the slacktivism trap. The substitution of substance with subtitle. Political science calls it moral licensing. When people retweet an infographic or hashtag, they feel virtuous, as if they have done their part. That fleeting satisfaction drains the will to do the hard work. Fundraising, lobbying, building institutions, and yet institutions are the only thing that win reparations. The Caribbean does not need retweets. It needs lawyers, researchers, lobbyists, and decades of sustained pressure. Social media culture requires the opposite. It elevates the cocktail, the viral moment, the influencer's brand, while starving the movement of its time. Consider the Caribbean and diaspora living in the UK, France, and the Netherlands. These are the people that actual power to vote in elections of the former colonial powers. They are the most strategic asset the movement has. If the Caribbean diaspora in London were organized into a disciplined lobbying bloc, similar to how the Jewish or Indian diaspora was organized, they could threaten the seats of MPs who oppose reparations. They could force the Labour Party to come to the table. That lobby does not exist. Like 10 years of bad reparation content, there is no Caribbean reparations block in Westminster. There is no systematic letter writing campaign. There is no coordinated voter registration drive into the 10-point plan. Why? We posit that social media has absorbed all the political energy that would have built these institutions. When a young British Caribbean citizen spends 3 hours armed with racists in a Twitter thread, they walk away exhausted, convinced they have done politics. But in truth, they have done nothing. Those hours did not build a town hall. Those hours did not raise a penny for legal research. They did not strengthen the institutions that win victories in parliament. Social media offers the illusion of struggle without substance or power. It bleeds the diaspora's energy into the cloud. It's harmless to Westminster, while the real work, the lawyers, the lobbyists, the researchers, the decade-long campaign was undone. And worse, the voice opposite of discipline, the viral party, the influencers brand, the fleeting moment of attention. The brightest young organizers who should be building the Caribbean's APAC are instead building their followers' count. This is not politics, it's performance. And performance will never deliver reparations. We see the result of this slowness in the lack of legislative progress. Compare the reparations movement to the anti-apartheid movement of the 1980s. That movement had no social media. It had to rely on church basements, union halls, and physical organization. Because it was physical and institutional, it could sustain pressure and sanction regimes would not ignore. Today, reparations movement has millions of times more
Point of
visibility, but a
information.
fraction decline. But a fraction of the institutional strength it has with what no depth. What pride means a prime minister is not a hashtag, it's a movement with a P. It's a block of voters, a coalition of lawyers, an institution that cannot be ignored. Social media offers none of that. It seduces activists with dopamine, splinters their voices, and leaves the Caribbean weaker in the eyes of Europe. The opposition dreams of chaos. We demand justice, hospitals built, debt erased, futures secured. That requires discipline, unity, and institutional power. Social media leads us to chaos, fragmentation, and performance. So let's just be clear. If the Caribbean wants to win the reparations, they must reject the illusion of online activism and build the kind of movement that leaders truly fear. For the sake of justice, I beg to propose.
And with that, we thank Herbert Morrison Technical High School for continuing this debate through your second substantive speech. And now welcome Merl to come back to us, telling us once more, furthering their opposition's case, why it is that we should not, why is it that actually social media does more for the advancement of reparatory via social media? Here.
I will begin my speech in 1, 2, 3, 4. Before I dive into my substantives, I would like to point out a hole in the proposition's notion. The proposition stated that social media is neither inherently good nor bad. So I asked the proposition, what is your stance, as the moot clearly states that social media activism has done more harm than good? Therefore, your neutral stance on the notion is contradictory and thereby agreeing with our stance. The proposition may use harm as a means of dismissing the extraordinary impact that social media activism has done for the reparations movement, such as this very competition. But I bring forth the question, is it that people should not do life-changing surgery because of the possibility of dying, or that people should never enter a car and forever walk because of the possibility of getting in an accident or getting kidnapped? The answer is no, as there is a risk of harm occurring in everyday or common activities. This is one of our many reasons why this house rejects the notion. This house believes that social media activism does more harm than good for the reparations movement. Good afternoon, judges and team proposition. My name is Sanjay Donaldson. To begin with, social media activism encourages youth participation in the reparations movement. Social media is how Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and millennials communicate. To argue that social media activism does more harm than good is to argue that we should return to pen, paper, and pigeons, tools of older generations who will soon pass on the torch. If we fail to meet young people where they already are, we are risking allowing the reparations movement to fade with time. Recent global events show the power of prompting youth participation in social media activism. In late 2025, youth-led protests filled the streets of Nepal, Madagascar, Rabat in Morocco, Limna in Peru, and Istanbul in Turkey, creating meaningful social change. Not accepted at this time, creating meaningful social change, all movements that were amplified and organized through digital platforms. By refusing to fully utilize social media out of fear that it causes harm, we are drastically reducing outreach to younger generations. And if young people are not informed, engaged, or inspired, the reparation movement is at risk of stagnation. This is especially important because formal education does not always cover these topics. In the United Kingdom, for example, the transatlantic slave is not mandatory in the national curriculum. The lack of education explains why many people are unaware of the reparations movement, entirely not accepted at this time. In fact, a member of Rawlins Academy admitted they only learned about reparations through this very competition promoting on social media. That alone demonstrates how essential social media activism is in promoting the youth to participate in the reparations and inviting fresh ideas that can advance the movement. Accepted at this time. Secondly, social media activism is far more cost-effective than traditional forms of political promotion. Historically, political movements relied on books, newspapers, travel, and physical distribution of materials. These methods required significant startup funds. Printing pamphlets could cost weeks of a worker's wages. Transportation added even more expense. Furthermore, there was always a risk that materials could be confiscated, damaged, or restricted by authoritarian governments, not accepted at this time. Additionally, activists themselves risk being harmed simply for speaking publicly, such as our very national hero, Sam Sharp. To sustain these operations, movements often had to charge for distributed materials to cover costs, such as Marcus Garvey charging for membership dues to fund operations. Accepted?
Okay, so can you please outline to me how exactly outreach is commensurate with understanding? We're not really clear what you're getting at here.
Outreach.
I will talk about that later in my speech. Comparatively, social media allows messages to be shared globally with the push of a button. The main requirement is access to a smartphone and internet connection, far cheaper than printing, shipping, or paying for international advertising. Instead of paying large sums of money to traditional media outlets, some of which have published misleading reports and later issued retractions, activists can control their own narratives directly. Lastly, my opponents may argue that social media activism does more harm than good. However, they fail to acknowledge that social media activism has protected and empowered activists in ways traditional media could not. Unlike newspapers or broadcasting media, social media platforms can provide relatively safer spaces for organization and discussion. In environments where authoritarian governments monitor and suppress public discourse, digital tools, particularly encrypted messaging apps, have allowed activists to coordinate while reducing immediate physical exposure. Furthermore, for example, in April 2023, civil activists in China were convicted because of subverting state power after attending a private civic discussion. This illustrates the risk activists face in physical spaces. In such contexts, digital activists can sometimes offer a layer of protection and broader international visibility. So no, social media activism does not cause more harm than good to the reparation movement. It strengthens it. In fact, can you source evidence that social media activism has negatively impacted the reparations movement? No, as it increases youth engagement, reduces costs, expands reach, and keeps the movement alive for future generations. To answer the question, outreach relates to understanding because it speeds up awareness. The opposition temporarily rests.
And with that, we thank you very much indeed, Merl, for those very fiery contributions on behalf of the opposition in this debate. That being said, though, ladies and gentlemen, we are now entering our second period of cross-examination, where we once more see the proposition team first fielding 3 questions to our opposition, followed by 3 questions by our opposition's team, as Merl, to Herbert Morrison Technical High School. Great. So Herbert Morrison Technical, your floor is now yours for you to field your first 3 questions to Merl.
Okay. So give us 1 second, please. I guess it was a couple of seconds here. It's just me asking what the physical. Yes. Yes, first question. You have stated multiple times during your speech about physical methods of activism, such as outreach programs, and when you mentioned the Rawlings Academy learning in schools, those are physical methods. Those are not social media activisms. How do you plan to explain how those relate to social media activism if those methods are physical and not using social media?
Could you repeat the question?
In your speech, you repeated multiple times regarding outreach programs and students learning in schools. What about reparations? Those are physical methods of activism. What about the social media versions? those are not fundamentally regarding to our motion. So how do you plan to explain the lack of social media activism in those communities?
When we're referring to the physical method you speak of, such as the Rawlings Academy situation, we are also talking about a digital aspect, as for example, this competition.
They would have found out through social media about this competition and therefore would have found out what reparations is about.
Because this is posted on Instagram.
They
and
said
TikTok.
that personally in the meeting.
Next question is it a smart strategy to build a movement meant to disrupt the status quo on platforms owned by billionaires to profit from the status quo? What happens when they decide your message is bad for business?
Could you repeat the question?
Is it a smart strategy to build a movement meant to disrupt the status quo on platforms owned by billionaires who profit from said status quo? What happens when they decide your message is bad for the business?
But this can be said for any form of media sources, even with established news outlets. The Fox News Corporation, if they don't want you to say certain things, they will block your messaging. And this is exactly why social media is so powerful, because it allows far more marginalized voices to speak out on issues compared to where they're being blocked because news outlets such as Fox Corporations or the BBC News are biased.
And if that's the case, for every viral post supporting reparations, there seems to be 10 rage-bait videos from the opposition using that post to mock the movement. Is this awareness worth giving the other side so much ammunition? That is to say, is it worth using social media activism to promote reparations rather than the physical movements?
I'm sorry, but that's two questions.
I'll repeat the question once more. For every viral post suggesting reparations, there are 10 retweet videos from the opposition using that post to mock the movement. Is the awareness worth giving the other side so much ammunition?
But when it comes to any form of political movement, there's going to be opposition. There will be people out at marches that will ridicule people and try to harm people who are protesting. For instance, in the Black Lives Matter movement, certain person's demographics may try to harm the persons protesting simply because they disagree with what they're saying. So this is not something special to social activism.
And to support her argument regarding what you said about rage bait, once again, it exists in forms of physical media outlets. Fox News is one of the infamous news sources that participates in rage bait, profiting our shock values of marginalized communities.
Okay, thank you so much indeed to Herbert Morrison for these very spirited questions, and to Merl for also responding in a similar fashion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we turn this cross-examination over to the opposition team, who will field the 3 questions to the team in proposition.
Now, you mentioned visibility and cartoonish impact, but what about true raw change, such as the protest eradicating totalitarianism in Iran with the help of social media?
First of all, I'm not sure about any protests that eradicated totalitarianism in Iran, because as we can see, given the status quo, there is a current all-out offensive fight for that. The American, where that is concerned.
In addition, the totalitarianism activism in Iran has no relation to the 300 years worth of impact that the Caribbean has received in regards to slavery, and you cannot compare the small effort that they can put towards their government to the reparations movement that we are putting to the UK.
Okay, next question. If social media activism does more harm than good, can you clearly quantify the harm and compare it to the measurable benefits?
Okay, so first we can quantify. We quantify the harms in 2 ways. yes, there is awareness, but there is no change in policy, then it has we see a lot of awareness, but we see no policy change and it's directly linked to social media activism. So we have still, as I had said in my speech, the width of the movement, as in the amount of persons who know about it, has grown, but how far we've reached has shrunken. The depth of the movement has not further than it was in the 1980s.
You account for slacktivism, but wouldn't you say that social media is a catalyst rather than a backbone of these foregoing fights for these infrastructural changes?
Could you repeat that once more?
You account for slacktivism, but wouldn't you say that social media is a catalyst rather than a backbone for these foregoing fights for these structural changes?
Absolutely not. As I would have stated before, social media cannot be a catalyst if the width of the movement has grown, but the depth of information, the amount of persons who are actually trying to build those structural changes, those institutions are not increasing, then it's pointless. It is pointless to say that it's the backbone. If the width of if the width of the movement has grown, but we are not progressing forward, there is no way you can say that social media is a catalyst. It may be a catalyst in the amount of persons who know about the movement, but it's not a catalyst in the amount of people who are simply trying to get forward in the movement.
Right. It's individualistic in its nature. I remember the sovereign nations for this debate. That's what we characterize the movement to be as. So it's only capitalistic in the sense of individuals. It's not individuals.
Thank you so very much to both teams for what was quite an interesting period of cross-examination, the second of which to have transpired in this debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this debate will pause momentarily for just 1 minute to allow both teams to tie up their notes, gather their thoughts, their arguments in rebuttal, after which we will first have the opposition team, that's Merl, coming with their final speech, the reply speaker, followed by the reply speech by the team in proposition, Herbert Morrison Technical High. That being said, your 1 minute begins now. All right, so 1 minute has elapsed. And with that, we welcome the third and final speaker on the opposition in this debate, Merl Grove High, to finish off this debate on side opposition. Here.
No, Johnny. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I begin my speech, I would like to address the ludicrous points brought up by the proposition team. The proposition talks about political polarization, but political polarization is not new. Long before social media, societies were deeply divided over issues like civil rights and even gender equality. Activism has always challenged dominant views, and challenge naturally creates disagreement. Division does not automatically mean harm. Often, it means uncomfortable conversations are finally happening. The proposition have yet to show me evidence of social media activism negatively impacting the reparations movement. Proposition, a catalyst by definition, is something that initiates or accelerates a process. Social media activism does that exactly. It sparks conversation. It speeds information rapidly, and it mobilizes people who may not have otherwise been engaged. The proposition also brought up the point of slacktivism. So proposition, because some people only share online, the whole movement is failing. That's not harm. That's a stage one of movements. Awareness comes first. Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag and grew into global protests. NSAR started online and translated into street action and international pressure. If 10,000 reposts and 200 mobilized, that's called impact, not failure. Proposition. The real risk isn't misinformation, it is silence. Reparation suffered for decades because no one heard about the facts, the ledgers, the records, the history. Social media actually corrects misinformation faster than all media ever could. Historians, economists, and descendants post the receipts literally, and when the truth goes viral, misinformation becomes harder, not easier. Proposition, we are not arguing that social media activism is the end all of the eternity of social justice movements. Rather, we are content that it serves as a starting point, the catalyst that raises awareness. Good evening, judges, the member of the House. My name is Ashante Radwe, and I stand proudly on the opposition bench. We reject the motion. This House believes that social media activism does more harm than good for the reparations movement. If social media activism truly does more harm than good, why are we even having this debate? Where did this conversation about reparations even gain traction? How else do you reckon people get aware of the disadvantages that Caribbean society still face today because of slavery? Is it in compressed textbook proposition on evening news channel, or is it on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and X? The very platforms my opponents are trying to dismiss. Think about it. We are evidence of social media activism. This debate exists because people online have been talking, sharing, and spreading knowledge. So, proposition, you agree with me, you just don't know it yet. The proposition stated that social media cannot suffice to talk about matters such as reparation. But my question is, why not? Social media activism is the public square of the 21st century. It is where movements are born and awareness spreads. Evidence of social media activism benefiting the reparation movement is when Everston Eloise issued housing reparations to 200 plus Black residents who could document harm from historic housing discrimination. Actual payments, not just posts. This first in the nation municipal program, now distributing millions into 25,000 benefits and even adding to direct cash options, gained momentum as reparation discourse was mainstreamed online, helping local policy cross the finish line. To reiterate my teammates' points, social media strengthens the reparation movement because it is far more cost-effective than traditional organizing. It protects activists who might face danger in physical spaces, and it energizes young people who are essential to sustaining any long-term social movement. After all, isn't accessibility the key to participation? Isn't safety a prerequisite for activism? And isn't youth engagement the very engine of future change? Social media also allows information to spread quickly and gives us the power to reclaim narratives whenever misinformation appears. So yes, proposition, social media activism promoted the reparation movement, and it spread history and mobilized people. Yes, some people repost and never act offline. Yes, misinformation spread. Yes, some engagement is superficial. But is imperfect awareness harm? Or is it the gateway to real action? Awareness comes first, discussion follows, organization follows, mobilization follows, policy follows. And here's the irony: we're debating reparations today because social media made people aware. You cannot benefit from digital visibility while condemning the very platform that provided it. The opposition team permanently raised.
Thank you very much indeed to you, Merl, for closing off this debate in opposition. And now to do so in a similar fashion, we welcome Herbert Morrison Technical High to close off this debate from the vantage point of the proposition team as the final speaker, the third top speaker in this debate. Here.
Okay, thank you. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, let me start off with the rebuttals. Social media is not social media activism. Media is a neutral actor, while activism is the people on that platform being driven by algorithms. Secondly, the opposition has not shown how outreach is directly linked to direct understanding of the fundamentals of reparations within the Caribbean. The opposition has continually brought up other activism that are not necessarily related to reparations, but humanitarian efforts, for example, Black Lives Matter. Panel, the question we must answer at the end of this debate is not whether reparations are just. We all agree they are. The question is whether reparations movement is close to victory, signed agreements, financial commitments, legal recognition today than it was 10 years ago. The opposition has told you that awareness is victory. They have told you that because millions of people have seen the word reparations on TikTok, the movement is winning. But let us be real. In the UK, support for reparations has flatlined. The Prime Minister refused to discuss it. In the Netherlands, an apology was given with a specific refusal to pay a single cent. Even where awareness increased and governments apologized, they still stop short of pay. So again, visibility does not equal to victory. In France, the conversation has regressed. Instead of moving to war negotiation, the political climate has become more defensive. French leaders, including President Emmanuel Macron, acknowledge the history of slavery, but reject financial reparations. Despite years of online activism, France is not close to pay. That is regression, not progress. And in the Caribbean, the movement is led by scholars and diplomats through the CARICOM Commission. They have built a detailed legal framework for reparations. But social media reduces that framework to slogans and viral outrage. When complexity is in place with hashtags, credibility suffers. If this is winning, what does losing look like? We have brought you 3 distinct failures of social media activism. Diplomatic failure. We explain the mechanism of trivialization. Social media is structurally incapable of communicating complex policy. It turns a 10-point plan into Britain owes me a check. The opposition never engaged with the structural nature of this problem. They pretended that good activists can just make better posts. But algorithms don't care about good intentions. They care about engagement. The most inflammatory, simplified version of demand always wins. This has allowed European leaders to strawman the movement. When Keir Starmer dismisses reparations as backward-looking, he's responding to the algorithm's caricature, not the legal framework crafted by Caribbean diplomats. The movement loses credibility in the very rooms where the treaty must be signed. Visibility online cannot replace influence in the negotiation. Second, political failure. We explain the backlash engine. Social media organizes your enemies faster than your friends. The opposition argues that all publicity is good publicity. However, in a diplomatic conflict, that logic fails. You need the British public to accept, not erupt in anger and riot when their taxes are used for reparations. Social media has polarized this issue into a culture war identity marker. It has hardened no vote in the UK. A British Prime Minister now pays a higher political price and risks more for agreeing to reparations than for refusing them. That is strategic catastrophe. Third, institutional failure. We explain slacktivism. The opposition tries to tell you that social media is a gateway drug to real activism. We told you it's a substitute. Online popularity does not translate into political power. We point to the missing institution. Where is the Caribbean lobbying bloc in London? Where is the organized voter pressure? It doesn't exist. Millions of people like, share, and comment online, but without a lobbying bloc in London, the movement has no voice in the rooms where decisions are made. Visibility alone cannot force governments to act. The energy of the diaspora has been captured by the platforms. People feel they have done their part by posting, and the movement is left with millions of followers, but zero political leverage. So, how do we make this wrong? The opposition is asking you to value visibility. They want to believe that being seen is the most important thing. We're asking you to value viability. We want you to believe that being effective is the most important thing. A movement that is famous but paralyzed is useless to the people of the Caribbean. A movement that trends every week but cannot secure a meeting with the Prime Minister is failing its ancestors. We are not saying the movement should go underground. We are saying it must return to strategies that constructed it: institutional organizing, legal scholarship, and disciplined diplomacy. These are the tools that dismantled apartheid. These are the tools that ended the slave trade, and these are the tools that the social media is actively eroding. The Caribbean deserves more than a viral moment. It deserves a victory. And because social media makes that victory harder to achieve, we are proud to propose a victory that lasts, not just a viral. Thank you.
And with that, we thank you very much indeed, Herbert Morrison Technical, for closing off this debate on proposition rather, and by extension, the entirety of this debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the task is set before this panel to deliberate and to determine the winner of this match. Quite a responsibility indeed for us to do. But with that, we will excuse ourselves momentarily, where we'll deliberate and return to you with the results. In the meantime, feel free to refresh yourselves, drink some water, have some debate of your own in the chat as to who you thought won this debate, and we will return momentarily with the results. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Asher Mondo, and I am a student at the Herbert Morrison Technical High School in Jamaica. And we're here to answer the whole reparations question. But as a debater, we have to frame it right. We have to frame it correctly. So we're seeing a basic clash here, right? There's a clash of what is it? Is it charity or is it the reality of debt? And we on side proposition believe that it is the reality of debt as opposed to the supposed notion of charity.
My name is Aldana Rodriguez, and here's our first substantive, which is unjust enrichment. The Britain's Industrial Revolution wasn't caused by just magic out of thin air. Instead, it was caused by 200 years of stolen Caribbean labor, which is why our economy demands a reversal.
Hello, my name is Maro Davis. I'm of the Herbert Morrison team. As my predecessor would have mentioned, our point is that reparations should be made towards us. And now I must move into our second comparative. The mechanism of harm. After slavery, Britain paid the oppressors and not the oppressed. That's like taking a man, breaking his leg, stealing his wallet, and telling him to pull himself up by the bootleg. How ironic.
So what we're seeing is that the comparative is true. It should not be framed as a sort of charitable act, but as something that we deserve, something that has been long overdue for a multitude of centuries. And that is why we believe that reparations is something that is necessary for us in the Caribbean.
Okay, I think this about wraps this interview up. When can you start?
Whenever you'd like. I just have a few questions. Where will I be stationed?
You'll be stationed in Jamaica. So you start your journey from Europe to Africa and then finally Jamaica.
Ooh, Jamaica? Where in Jamaica?
La Nueva. You'll be staying there with free housing and free lunch and dinner and breakfast.
Free housing and lunch? I'm about ready to sign my contract. I just have a question. What will be my responsibilities at the CB a la Nueva?
Oh, nothing. As a harvester for the Royal African Agency, you will be responsible for cutting, threshing, gathering, winnowing, collecting, unloading, and residue management.
And this comes with extra on top of my base pay of 97,000 USD, right?
No.
No to the bonuses?
No, you'll all be getting 500 USD.
Excuse me, what?
Oh no, but that's a pay for the Indians. You won't be getting paid.
Sorry, Indians what?
You get free housing though. And enough food to allow you to live and
Yep, this is me. You're probably confused how I ended up back in the encomienda system. Free housing, free food, but no pay. How's this different? Colonizers used to say, we'll feed you and shelter you, only in exchange for your freedom, your voice, your rights, your sanity. I mean, should I really go on? But anyways, let's go back to the video.
it's a lot of vitamin D.
I think I'm gonna leave.
Where are you going? Didn't you want the job?
I did, but I don't think I'm the best fit for this.
Isn't she African?
I'm from Germany! tied at their hands, tied at their feet. Our ancestors traveled bounded across Tetris seas, packed like a tin sardines.
Slavery was crazy back then, and its effects are still evident now. That's why we believe that we need reparations. My name is Astarte Montague.
And my name is Ashanti Rodriguez.
And my name is Sanjay Donaldson. We are the Merl High School debate team, and this is our video on why we need reparations today. We, as descendants of those who were colonized and enslaved, still live with the damages today. And our colonizers still benefit from the wealth that was stolen from our ancestors.
European colonizers stole the land, labor, and resources from the indigenous people and the Africans, gaining wealth from slavery and exploitation while leaving our nations poor and underdeveloped. This isn't just history. The effects are still here. Poverty, inequality, and economic dependency all trace back to that period.
Reparations are necessary, not as charity, but as justice. They are both acknowledging the crimes of colonialism and the crimes of slavery. This is about repairing the harm done and creating fair opportunities for those who were affected.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Ekiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of a people. And of course, we all want all students across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace the system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not just learning about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo, the history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactment, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Marus, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debate, which is already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust. in diverse classroom. This is credible as the RAN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also
Points of information
that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring two substantive. One, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And two, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency, and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced, trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RAN Corporation study, students in these programs which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers, and we are currently doing this now through reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, who have faced their history head-on with regards to the Holocaust, show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And two, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And three, it protects future generations from repeating injustice itself. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the US high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 1865, it undermines every effort to promote justice and equality today. Silence gives racism plausible deniability that it suggests falsely that if we don't talk about injustice, it must not exist. The impact, it ensures future generations. And with that, And with that, the proposition momentarily rests.
400 years ago. 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what would be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you were met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, master said there's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight we're returning to Ghana.
You need to move over a little bit to your left. Yes.
Evening once more, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning into this match, round two, the third match in round two, that is, of the International Reparations Debate Competition, where we would have just seen Herbert Morrison Technical High School in proposition going up against Merl, where they would have debated whether social media activism has done more harm or good for the reparation campaign on a whole. So reparation debate, just to be noted, are never just about like tactics, but they are about legitimacy, the dignity, and architecture of political change. So both teams the panel decided, or we believe understood this, and it made for a round of real substance. So the decision by the panel was unanimous. But before I give you the final, the results, the who won, I'll explain the decision in a way that I hope is beneficial to both teams going forward. So firstly, just a reiteration of the motion. This House believes that social media activism does more harm than good for reparations or for the reparations movement. And the wording we believe matters in this debate because it presupposes that there is some inherent good that social media activism can produce. So the task for proposition in this debate, therefore, is not to claim that there is no good at all or that there is an absence of social media, but it is to show comparatively whether the good that exists is outweighed by the harms, either in scale, either in likelihood, or the severity of the action. So in proposition leaned into arguments implying that that there is essentially no meaningful benefit. They made their burden harder than it needed to be. In parts, it kind of stepped outside of what the motion already concedes. Opposition in this debate, by contrast, embraced the correct comparative burdens. Yes, there are harms, but the good is larger, it is more consistent, and it is strategically more important. So where the debate kind of turned was really the communication mechanism and the marginal reach. So opposition in this debate kind of, for the panel, showed us an important clash, which is like how political or communication in general as a principle works in movements that rely on legitimacy building or even outreach. So their comparative to show, which was kind of simple but pretty clear, is that even if social media only reaches an additional portion of the public, even as low as 10%, who could otherwise never engage, that is meaningfully objective, more objective again than movements like reparations. Why is that the case? Because reparation movements are not like solely by the already convinced, but they are won by shifting the terrain of what is thinkable, what is teachable, and what is politically safe. So, in as much as opposition in this debate argued to say that, well, there are algorithms on social media, and so it's going to probably create echo chambers or stuff like that. We think the concession by opposition in this debate, in as much as those exist, the one you're already gaining or reaffirming the subscription of those who already believe this narrative. But in addition to that, you're also able to reach persons who otherwise, with the absence of social media, probably wouldn't know what reparations is because of reasons that the second speaker concedes, like the UK curriculum, for example, not teaching reparations or not going as in depth. Whereas on social media, you're able to gain this kind of traction, you're able to gain this kind of knowledge. So you're now more aware as to what reparations is and whether or not you choose to subscribe to it. So things here. Firstly, to explain that social media reaches both the already sympathetic and the neutral, and algorithms are able to reinforce those communities. Secondly, they framed additional engagement as intrinsically valuable because in reparations, advocacy, the awareness is not like a cosmetic good enough itself, but it is a gateway kind of good, meaning you're able to access new kinds of pathways. To the to the point though of the proposition in this debate, well, they came and they told us a few harms that we're likely to get because of social media uniquely, i.e., people. Well, it can be heavily politicized. That is to say, you're able to get polarizing views on reparations. You're going to get in addition to the proponents of or the advocates, you're going to get stronger backlash, stronger pushes, whereas opposition concedes to that and tell us that this exists in both worlds. But even more uniquely to the point of proposition in this debate is where you tell us that because by human nature, essentially, when people start to see that they're going to gain more followers as a result of being on social media, they're more likely to care more so about the follower count, the popularity in a sense, more so than doing the actual work, which they tell us is bad. The problem, though, from the view of the panel, is that that was all that there was to it. That you said that there's going to be people are going to become more concerned with their follower count. But we don't know as a panel why is this the case or why is this likely in a grand scheme of things? Because logically, if you assume that somebody does something and gain a follower, then you're going to most likely do more of that thing to gain more followers. So it means that you're going to have to act more. So the burden then on proposition was to prove to us as a panel, why is it that more people are more going to be concerned with the follower counts? What are they going to do differently as opposed to probably advocacy work? Are they just going to make posts? Are they going to become content and do nothing? Questions like those we think were going to be would have been very, very helpful. So visibility for issues that are otherwise sidelined, especially in societies that treat reparations as distant than actually living them. So we think those barriers. And finally, I'll just credit this or profit this was the whole engagement as to the future of advocacy, where opposition in this debate came and told us about young people. Young people like you who are debating this motion. They told us that for the benefit of activism and for its likely continuation, social media is a gateway where we can bridge young people and the older generation at one intersection where it's being able to continue because you're able to meet young people at a point in which they're able to have a common understanding and push the issue more. And so the panel kind of prepared this model because it was grounded for us in the reality of the political change. Reparations often resisted not because people have never heard about it, but because they have not been confronted with it repeatedly and critically. So social media then, when used effectively, can generate that kind of repetition and credibility at the scale and also lowering the barriers for entry. All right. So with that being said, before I announce the winners of this match, I just invite once more both teams to unmute your microphones. So as to when the announcement is reached, we can hear some visible cheers coming across from both teams. So the team that would have won this match ended up on 279 points. That's quite an incredible score and truly reflective of the kind of match this was. And the team that unfortunately would not have won this match and not have automatically advanced ended on 265 points. So that's a 14-point difference, showing in a way the kind of landslide and deficits that would have existed in this match. So with that, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the team that would have won this match is the team in opposition, Merl Grove High School. Hearty congratulations to you on advancing to round 3. All right, I heard some visible, some audible cheers just now. All right, again, hearty congratulations.
Stop, Harris, Harris.
And a very well tried meeting to Herbert Morrison Technical High School. What we thought were some very credible points just in the absence of sufficient mechanization warranting. Don't feel disheartened though. There are still a few more, albeit a slightly smaller amount of wildcard slots that you might be eligible to or for in securing an advancement to round 3 of this competition. Again, ladies and gentlemen, just for the sake of viewing audience, the team that would have won this match is the team in opposition to this debate, Merl Grove High School, and regrettably, the team that placed second is the team in proposition, Herbert Morrison Technical High Schools. The scores 279 to the team in opposition and 265 to the team in proposition, a 14-point decision. Once more, the call by the panel was a unanimous decision. Thank you very much.
Before we like to move on, we would like
Congratulations to each other. And it would be remiss of me as the chair in this match and on behalf of the panel to not announce who we thought was the best speaker in this debate, which also comes to us from the team in opposition. We believe the best speaker to have been the second speaker in this debate, who we thought was brought some compelling cases as to advance their team and solidify their rankings, talking to us about the matter of youth in advocacy and why they are uniquely able to add to the conversations. Also talking about some comparative analysis we thought which would have been helpful in securing the team's position. So hearty congratulations once more to the second speaker from Merl Grove High School.
Thank you. Congratulations. Yeah.